The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Welcome to the show. Hi to everyone who's watching live on our YouTube channel, as we are back live Monday through Thursday, 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific. A lot of stories to talk about today. Chuck Hagel has now been officially nominated by President Obama to be Defense Secretary. The controversy mounting immediately. Let's start looking through the good, the bad, the arguably questionable about Chuck Hagel. Now, something that seems to be unanimously considered good about Chuck Hagel as Defense Secretary nominee is that he earned his wariness of war the hard way with 2 Purple Hearts in Vietnam. And he realizes that sometimes muscle and not talk is what works, but that very often talk and not muscle is what works. And I like that about him. And that's partly why he is kind of considered a defector to the Republican Party in many cases.
All right.
The bad is that he has been very backwards in the past when it comes to homosexuality. He opposed a Clinton administration ambassadorial nominee for being what he called openly and aggressively gay. He has since recanted openly and aggressively. He has said that it was a mistake and so on and so forth. Okay, fair enough. His views, have they evolved? Have they not? I don't know. They certainly don't seem to have aligned with mine at some point. I do believe, though, that on that issue, people can change. They can just understand really what we're talking about, and the knee-jerk reactions to be against just basic equality are replaced with reason and thought. So I could see that.
But we're not talking about things he said when he was 18.
We're not.
This did not happen that long ago, and I don't think people change that quickly. And I think once you reach a certain point in your life, you're a lot less likely to change. Once you've reached your, I don't know, your peak, if you will, the peak of your political views and social views.
We'll talk about that in a ton. I mean, especially with the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and potentially Chuck Hagel stepping into a situation that certainly has a lot of working directly with the military. What's your thought on that? Is the fact that now that if we don't believe his apology, if we believe he apologized, but he still believes what he said initially, is that a factor?
Well, there's no way to know what he really thinks. All we know is that he's changed his public position. And honestly, that's all we can really ask for. I mean, you have to remember that there were a lot of military leaders that were in the Army when it was still segregated. And when it was desegregated, a lot of those guys stayed on for a few years. And if you as long as you publicly say that that you now support, the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell and gay rights, etc., I don't think that we can really judge what he believes in his heart,
All right. Well, so let's talk about the questionable. There's a questionable, there's controversy from the right being very critical of Chuck Hagel for being the only senator who did not, now remind me, Natan, this was a resolution that was proposed in the Senate?
Yeah, it was. He was the only senator out of 100 to vote against it. Do you want to describe what it is?
Yeah, so the resolution basically said that it was going to direct Boris Yeltsin to address anti-Semitism within Russia, essentially. Is that it?
That's right. However, what was going on here is that Chuck Hagel was against any resolution that called for a foreign leader to address a domestic issue. But if the issue here, if what people are thinking is that he was somehow against condemning anti-Semitism, he then sent a letter to President Bill Clinton and urged him to urge Boris Yeltsin to address the issue, which, by the way, he said would be probably more effective than a resolution that Boris Yeltsin wouldn't read.
Yeah, and Louis, on this show, we're criticized very often for just pointing to anti-Semitism where it doesn't exist, and I typically disagree with the audience on those situations. However, here, I really don't believe that this is evidence that Chuck Hagel is an anti-Semite. I mean, like Natan said, what he says he was against was doing things in the Senate to encourage or direct the leader of another country to do something domestically. And he did go to Bill Clinton and say, I would like you to ask Boris Yeltsin to do this, because as the president, it's much more likely Yeltsin would listen to Bill Clinton than to some resolution from the Senate. I actually think that this is a perfect example of something that if it was George W. Bush who had nominated Chuck Hagel, we would not be hearing a word about this.
Perhaps. And I agree with you that it is not conclusive that he is anti-Semitic or anything of the sort. I tend to agree with him if that's what he truly believes, that this is something our Senate should probably not be worried about.
Yeah, I mean, what if there was something voted in the Russian Senate directing the president to do A, B, or C?
It'd be laughably ridiculous.
Every single one of these right-wingers that's criticizing Hagel would say, what right does the Russian Senate have to direct our domestic policy?
I don't agree with that.
Are you kidding?
Yeah, I think that you're saying you agree with Chuck Hagel's idea that the Congress shouldn't be involved in telling another country what to do with their own problems. Is that what you're saying?
I'm not saying that the U.S. broadly cannot have conversations with other countries, but what I'm saying is the idea of just sending off these resolutions based on Senate votes, directing other presidents to do specific things domestically, if it was reversed, those same senators or these same Republicans that now are being critical of Hagel for having that view would be ignoring those resolutions from other countries.
That's possible. I do think that it's perfectly reasonable to condemn a foreign leader for the way he's handling an issue domestically when we talk about more serious issues. I mean, I don't agree with the reason why Hagel didn't sign this. I just think that it's not an example of anti-Semitism.
All right,
I say let the president or the secretary of state handle that stuff.
Last thing, I think conservatives actually don't like Chuck Hagel, not only because it's Obama nominating him, but because Chuck Hagel in 2011 said the Pentagon budget is bloated and must be pared down. And we know Republicans do not like that. That's no question about it.
Right.